All right, welcome back to the My Church broadcast. This is Pastor Sonny. Thank you for joining me. All right, we're going to pick right up where we left off. We're going to wrap up the first cycle of punishment. All right, let's begin. Overall, Israel continued to spiral downward. All right. In 1 Samuel, you read of two horrible acts on the part of Israel. The first concerns the fact that the tabernacle itself was being run by Satan's own men. The second was when the nation rejected their theocracy, desiring a king like those of the other nations. They wound up asking Samuel to do the very thing that Satan's policy of evil against them was designed to produce. The capacity of Satan to corrupt Israel lay in destroying the distinctiveness of the nation God had created. After 450 years, they not only were not reformed by God's judgments, but they asked for Satan's policy of evil to reign over them rather than God. Since they had put their religious system, the tabernacle, in the hands of Satan's men, the sons of Belial, and wished to put the government into the hands as well, Israel qualified for the second cycle of judgment. However, before we look at those things, we need to see what punishments were contained in the first cycle. Judges chapter 2 verse 16. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges, which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. And yet they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went a-whoring after other gods, and bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of the Lord. But they did not so. And when the Lord Israel raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, in following other gods to serve them, and to bow down unto them. They ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. And he said, because that this people hath transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice, I also will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations which Joshua left when he died. We have now been told how to handle the information given to us in the remainder of the book of Judges. The downward cycle described here can be seen throughout the rest of the book. There were temporary stays to the judgments, but the cycle was never reversed. The cycles just got worse and worse when the relapses occurred. Therefore, it is easy to anticipate the coming of the second cycle. In 1 Samuel chapters 12 through chapter 15, the nation was declared to be worthy of the second cycle of judgment. God essentially told Samuel to tell the people to ready themselves for the next punishments. Samuel performed the sign for the second cycle. Can you see how understanding Leviticus 26 and Judges chapter 2 enables you to anticipate it? Verse 16 indicates something that was not part of the law contract. Providing the judges was something God did based on His mercy. In Exodus, just after the law had been passed down, God told Moses that he reserved to himself the right to operate outside of the law contract. Why would God do that? Because God knew Israel's actions would be so bad that if he did not reserve the right, he would be forced to totally destroy his people from the earth. Thus God reserved the right to operate from his mercy, and he wound up doing so with every cycle of punishment. How did God intercede in the first cycle outside of the contract? He did so by providing judges, something he clearly was not obligated to do. Leviticus 26 contains no such provision for Israel. The provision for mercy is also the reason for the stay of judgment in the days of David and Solomon before the second cycle punishments. This compassionate pause was outside of what God was demanding by the law contract. As we will see in a later session, the nation was actually worthy of the punishments of the second cycle by 1 Samuel, chapters 12 through 15. But because of the interlude of God's mercy, the second cycle arrived later, as described in 1 Kings chapter 11. Now, we're going to go back to the book of Exodus to observe when God reserved the right for himself. Thank God that he did so. These mercies were instituted so that if Israel returned to God, obedient people would not have to go through the next cycle of judgment and punishments. Now we learned that the books of Judges through Ruth, as well as the first 15 chapters of 1 Samuel, gave details of the first cycle. We also understand that the judges were not part of the law contract, but were provided by God in his mercy. You'll have to forgive me. I don't know why I keep yawning. I don't know why. It just keeps happening. God reserved the right to act out of his mercy, as he told Moses before the people entered the land. None of this should be interpreted as God violating the contract made at Mount Sinai. In fact, it is through this kind of action that the nation saw that God's Jehovahness and grace were their only hope of becoming the great nation of promise. Now we need a little background at the very beginning of the law to see when God made provision to give mercy to Israel. Now, if you're not familiar with the incident of the golden calf in Exodus 32 and 33, stop here and acquaint yourself with it. All right? I want you to go acquaint yourself. And then you can come back and listen to the rest of this. All right? Now, I'm not telling you to stop listening. All right. If you're not familiar with it, take the time after this session to go read it before you begin the next session. All right. Moses has already made a preliminary offer of the law contract to the people. They responded that they wanted the law. Moses went back up to the mount where he received the 623 laws, including the 10 commandments from the Lord. Now, while he was there, the people got antsy about where Moses was, and they made a golden calf to worship. God informed Moses that the people, having just said yes to the law contract, had already corrupted themselves and violated the very first law. which forbade them to worship any other gods. At this early point, Israel was already worthy of the first cycle of judgment. The conversation the Lord had with Moses is most interesting. In Exodus 33, the Lord revealed that he would have to act mercifully in connection with the terms of the law contract. Exodus 32, verse 1. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wrought not what has become of him. Notice how they said Moses had brought them out of Egypt, although over and over the point had been made that it was the Lord who had brought them out of Egypt. Exodus 13, verse 3. And Moses said unto the people, Remember this day in which ye came out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of the hand of the Lord brought you out from this place. Exodus 16:6. The Lord hath brought you out from the land of Egypt. Leviticus 19:36. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. You get the point. Over and over again, the point was made to the people that it was the Lord who brought them out of Egypt. In Exodus 32, they said it was Moses. Although Moses certainly did lead them, the Lord was who they should have been looking to, and not Moses. When this occurred, God told Moses exactly what was taking place. Exodus 32, verse 7, And the Lord said unto Moses, Go, get thee down, for thy people, which thou broughtest up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. Now observe the conversation as it continues in the next verse, verse 9. And the Lord said unto Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them, and I will make of thee a great nation. Now what is evident in this statement is that God had the right to destroy the nation right then and there, under the terms of the law contract. God could have swiped them out and started over with Moses to create the great nation. God said this to Moses so it would be clear that God had the right to act out of his mercy, in spite of what the nation deserved under the law. Moses correctly followed with statements addressing God's plan and purpose with the nation, and God acknowledged Moses' correctness. However, another point was being made here concerning God's mercy. God could have, in strict compliance to the law contract, destroyed the people before they ever left Mount Sinai, and he would have been righteous in doing so. The fact that God did not destroy the people indicates a measure of mercy and grace offered to the nation. This discussion continues on through chapter 33, with the point actually being made to Moses. Now at the beginning of Exodus 33, God told Moses to take the people up to the land promised them, but God would not be going with them. Exodus 33, verse 1, And the Lord said unto Moses, Depart and go up hence, thou and thy people, which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto the land which I swear unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, Unto thy seed will I give it. And I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. For I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in the way. In verse 12, Moses was confused because of this statement. Look at verse 12. And Moses said unto the Lord, See, thou sayest unto me, Bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me? Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight. God said what he did in order to get Moses thinking, and so that God could present this issue of dealing merciful with Israel in spite of the law contract. What God knew was that without reserving to himself the right to deal mercifully, the nation would constantly be in danger of being wiped out. Exodus 33 verse 13. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. Now when Moses said, Show me now thy way, he wasn't asking for a roadmap. What he was asking is, considering what these people are, how will you deal with them? Moses wanted to know how God was going to operate with people who were always going to be on the verge of being eliminated. When Moses asked about God's way, he wanted to know by what means God would deal with them. He was asking how God would deal with them so the nation would indeed be thy people. See the end of verse 13? In verse 17, God said he would show Moses exactly what Moses was asking for. He would show Moses his way. Verse 17, And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. In verse 19, God was going to show Moses what he reserved the right to do in spite of the law contract. It is inherent in God's nature to be merciful. God said to Moses that he would cause all my goodness to pass before Moses. Then God said he would proclaim his name to Moses. The compound Jehovah name we have seen before. At the end of the verse, we get to what God had been referring to all along. Verse 19. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. That is the issue. God was reserving the right to be gracious and merciful to a nation that deserved to be wiped out according to the very contract she signed. Once again, God knew that if he didn't allow for this mercy, the nation could not survive. What does all of this mean? Only through God's Jehovahness and grace would the nation have any possibility of ever becoming all that his plan and purpose described. God would put his mercy into effect during all of the cycles of judgment. In the first cycle of punishment, God graciously raised up judges to bring the people back to him and deliver them from their enemies. This happened over and over during the 4.5 centuries of the first cycle. Now, we have left much out of our discussion of Exodus 32 and 33. But God would go with them, have mercy on them, and be gracious to them, even in the midst of the law contract. This is the way God will deal with them all of the way to the establishment of the kingdom. Now, understand that concerning the terms of the law, concepts such as mercy and grace were foreign. The book of Hebrews bears witness to this fact. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 28. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, I want to back up a minute because I want to show you a point about God's mercy. We read where God was telling Moses, you know, Moses, I want to wipe them out and I'll start over with you. And Moses, he pleaded with God, and he told God, reminded God, hey, this is your people, and so God had mercy. But we can see just just a little bit over from there, Moses is telling God, just wipe them out, just wipe them out. And God didn't do that. Moses had got to the point where he was fed up with them, but God showed mercy. All right? Now, being ignorant of God's mercy and grace, many scholars have charged God with being angry, mean-spirited, and capricious in the Old Testament. However, when you understand what the law was about, what Israel agreed to do, and how God responded, you discover that he was long-suffering and merciful. The fact that Israel survived it all proves God's grace in dealing with them. Even today, men continue to overestimate what they deserve from God. When the Lord descended and passed by Moses, take a look at what he declared as recorded in Exodus 34. Verse 5. And the Lord descended in a cloud and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed by before him, and proclaimed the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty. The issue of God's name is connected to so much in your Bible. Without going into much detail, let me remind you that the fifth cycle prophets told the nation that she would behold her Messiah in 4 particular ways. Each of the writers of the 4 gospel accounts presented Jesus as Israel's Messiah in one of those 4 ways. When John wrote his gospel, his goal was very different from that of the other gospel writers. John wanted Israel to behold God. Thus, what did John say in presenting Jesus Christ? The words full of grace and truth were snatched right out of Exodus 34 verse 5. Look at John chapter 1 verse 14. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, if we had taken the time to go through the Exodus account in some detail, you would immediately recognize that the glory of the Father was exactly what Moses asked about when he wondered how God would deal with Israel. Exodus 33 verse 17. And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. And he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. In 1 John, we find the goal of John's gospel was to reveal that glory of God that was shown to Moses. It was demonstrated back at Sinai, and when Jesus came, the Word made flesh, God's glory was shown again for 3.5 years among the people of the nation. And the importance of this issue is underscored by the fact that 3 full chapters are dedicated to it. Moses was made aware of this truth about God, and it's recorded so that he may see it too. God will have mercy and grace on whom he wants, whenever he wants. And the believing remnant in the Lord's day of wrath will call for God's grace in his dealings with them in the final part of the 5th cycle. And we'll go to Hosea chapter 14 when we come back and study this. All right? We'll be back in our next session.